Hello, this is Alan G. Davison, and I am the author of The Blessed. I've decided to try and create a small series of videos, and not so much for fans or anything like that, though if they do attract attention, that'd be a welcome blessing in my opinion. Did I make a point? Okay, whatever. Anyway, the whole concept behind these is to actually keep track of my own thoughts and have some semblance that I can go back to. Because I've recently realized while working on the second book, I'm currently working on chapter 33, yay me, that it's a little difficult to keep track of every single little idea that you've ever had. So I've decided to try and chronicle my original thoughts, at least for my own sake, on the different characters and different ideas that I've come up with over time. I guess the beginning would be a great place to start. The book was originally created as a brainchild of a friend of mine. The gentleman was he was an interesting friend, and we met each other at Baker College here in Auburn Hills, Michigan. And he was an interesting character. He always wore some interesting clothes, long jean, like jacket. I can't remember exactly what he wore. My memory's a little hazy, I'm afraid. But he always wore this long jacket, and I always slick back hair. I really was jealous of it. I really thought he was doing all of that outfit stuff just to draw attention, which was kind of silly of me, I'll admit. But, you know, that's how first impressions go. They're not always right or correct. Anyway, after I ended up talking to him for a little while, I'm going to name him based off of his book counterpart, Lucius. He was an interesting individual, and I happened to get along with him relatively well, despite the, religious differences that we actually had. Though, we oftentimes joked about it with our other friend, who, for the sake of the audio stuff, is by the name of Darius, who was Jewish. So, more often than not, that sounds like a really interesting or bad joke to begin with. A Christian, a Jew, and a Druid all walk into Baker College. What are the, It was an interesting time period. I have to admit, my grandparents got a little, touchy about the idea, but, whatever. Eventually, he got it into his head that he wanted to, create a comic book to change the world. Now, mind you, none of us have any drawing talent whatsoever, so I was pretty blatant about shooting this idea down. It was oftentimes something that we would talk about as just crazy concepts and ideas. He also wanted to do like a audio thing where we'd get around a microphone and just talk back and forth, because our conversations usually got pretty interesting. I can't remember them, so that probably goes about how memorable they were, but they were always interesting. So I felt kind of depressed and bad for, so thoroughly dissing it down, because I myself have always wanted to actually write for comic books, and because I am, to this day, a big Superman and Batman fan. All rights reserved. There's no copywriting. This is strictly unprofessional in every sense of the word, but I want to make sure nobody can sue me, because who knows? People are out there. They will do it! Anyway, I basically, up until this time, had taken, interest in fan fiction. I really was a big fan of the Naruto, Harry Potter, mostly Naruto that I delved into, and still do to this day, to be honest. I wasn't very successful at it, mind you. Not very many people were all that interested in my works. And most of the time I got criticisms on my editing skills, and how everything just, "Your editing sucks!" was most of my reviews that I actually got, and I sort of ignored them most of the time, but I did take one of my, stories down, and for a time I really was going to quit, just because that was the only thing I ever got. But I'd been involved in it for a little while, and I was like, you know what? Tell you what, you guys come up with some characters, I'll write the story out, let's go from there. And that's pretty much how the book actually got started. It was just more or less a little project between a couple of friends up at Baker College. And eventually I don't know why I ever decided to start writing when I can't even speak proper English, let alone write it. Oh, boy. I'm pretty sure my editor was pulling their hair out of their head when they actually went over my book. Anyway, they, came up with a couple of characters, and I wanted a good plot twist, so I really made the timeline for the overall book very complicated, even though the first book itself is relatively straightforward in terms of how I set everything up. You know, classic farm boy gets his, life destroyed, goes out on a quest. But I wanted to change it up a little bit. I was never the type of individual who liked to become completely original, but at the same time, I did not want to do something that had been used repeatedly over and over again. You have your Aragorn, your Luke Skywalker. I'm pretty sure the whole farm boy mantra has been used repeatedly over and over and over again. But I really wanted to create something a little bit different in the sense that this character could have gone on and lived the rest of his life in this setting, in this environment, and he never would have been too bothered by it. And I really wanted to come up with the contradictions of revenge versus the right thing to do with this character. I'll get a little bit more into that when I actually go into Dayen's character in its own little audio. But like I said, I wanted things to be interesting, different, and sort of is this revenge, or is this, is this doing the right thing for the right reasons? Which I honestly think would be a really interesting interpretation and thought process of a character going through these sort of events. Eventually, I decided when we were originally creating it that no one character that was based off of the actual individual would be the main character. So we had Darius and Lucius. We had Darius the soldier and Lucius the knight. For anybody who actually, goes out and, buys the book or at least looks at it, those are who the two characters are referring to. I put everyone in code more or less. I had a little too much fun with this. Anyway, afterwards, I really wanted that, so I created Dayen as sort of my idealism of a hero and my honest to God thought process on how a true hero would probably think under these certain circumstances. Mainly because I didn't want a revenge obsessed hero. I didn't want a Batman. I from the day I was born, I was always a hero, a boy, I was always after the Boy Scouts. I always believed that good triumphs over evil, and that is how the world worked. Well, mind you, my perspective has changed minorly over time, but I still always rooted for the true blue good guy. And I wanted to create a story that really showed that sometimes you need a good guy in order to win. There isn't going to be an evil versus evil fight, and no matter how much you try to stoop to your opponent's level, there's just some things that they will always be better at than you. So that was the original creation of Dayen. I really did enjoy actually writing for him, and I really am kind of depressed that I wasn't capable of keeping the character that I myself anyway, out of the main character. Darius actually went and told me that every single time he sort of read the book, he always sort of saw me as Dayen. I kind of broke my heart a little bit, but he told me that most of the time, most authors, when they actually write from a main character's perspective, they have to put a little bit of themselves into the main character. Which, when I actually look back at it, I think almost every single character in the story has a little bit of me in it. In some cases, the villain's more than the hero, since I am very crazy when I want to be. And to be honest, I always thought the idea of playing a villain of some kind at some level would always be much more enjoyable than playing a hero. Though, to be honest, I still always will root for the hero, even if I am playing the villain. That was always the fun part. Now, the book itself actually took about 2 years for me to write. Mainly because when I first started off, I didn't really think anything of it. I was kind of like a fun project. And what I would do is I would write a chapter up and I would send it to my two friends. And they would look at it and they'd say, yeah, cool, pretty good, I like it. I never really got any serious feedback from anyone while they were reading the book. And to this day, on 4/11/2012, I am still begging for people to give me input. Which is kind of depressing that I actually still have to do that, but, that's just how the world works, is that when you want an opinion, nobody's willing to give it to you, but when you really don't care at all what other people have to think, it seems that there's no limit to the people lining up to tell you what you're doing wrong. I was actually, working through the book at a relatively steady pace. Nothing too amazing, mind you, until I actually ran into two more individuals. He hasn't appeared in... The character he gave me hasn't appeared, but I'll call him by that name anyway. One was Definity, and the other was Mr. Crowley. Both of these two individuals don't actually make appearances until the second book, which I'm currently writing. And Steve, I just said his name. You don't... Crap. Alright. Forget you heard anything. Anyway, Definity was the first one I actually ran into, and he was he was an aspiring comic book writer. The irony of running into him of all people after the original idea was for a comic book. He was an interesting guy. I really did enjoy talking to him a lot, just, bouncing story ideas back and forth. We came up with another idea for a comic book, which was taking the sci-fi, the sci-fi fantasy, like your elves and your dwarves, and turning them into a more modern time, but making it a little bit more serious, not the cliched stuff that you actually see where they get transported, but what if these actual societies had evolved with technology and magic still around? Anyway, I really started to get into writing the story itself, and my other creative ideas and like fan fiction started to seriously take a back door to a lot of my work at this point in time. Not that a whole lot of people were really complaining. Most of the people still don't actually give any reviews, like how come this hasn't updated or anything like that. So yeah, it's kind of depressing when you put a lot of work into something but nobody really pays a whole lot of attention to it. But to be honest, I was never going to go anywhere with writing fan fiction, and despite my desires and love for it, without a proper editor of some kind, my stories would be impossible to follow sometimes. Well, with Steve, he came up with a couple of characters, and I eventually incorporated them, simply for the fact that I really like their names. You'll be surprised how much more important they are when the second book actually comes out, but I always enjoyed that complicated backstory sort of thing, where I would take a character and I would incorporate it into the story into a way that, without them, it would be a completely different story. Definity and the other character, Skits, that he gave me, I kept Skits, and I have no idea what her ability was or what her personality was. I just loved the name so much that I was like, yes, Skits is going to be in the story. Yeah, that's exactly the equivalent of how my actual characters come into be. And I wouldn't be satisfied with just throwing random characters in there. I have backstories, histories, timelines written for every single character that comes into the actual story. And well, as much as I enjoy the cartoony villains where he takes over the world because it's Tuesday, every single character, I think, and villain has some real reason, some background, some history that would really, really make sure that the character really explains why they're doing what they're doing. I think except for one, which is way too far into the future for me to really peg anything down on him just yet. I wanted him to be a pirate for the sake of being a pirate. And, not like One Piece sort of pirate, but actual pirate. Now, let's see here. The actual story itself has gone through many different iterations. Originally, the main villains for the first book were supposed to be called bandits, but I changed the name. Funny thing about that is that